Well, today we're going to talk about one of my favorite vehicles, and I've titled this Last of the Broughams because we're discussing the 1978 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz that you see here, the final year for the big full-size Eldorado in all its glory, the Biarritz trim. Now, this one is one that's near and dear to my heart because I didn't own a 78 Eldorado Biarritz in this color combination, but I owned a 76 Eldorado Biarritz in this color combination. And, well, white with red is a hard color combo to beat for this car. I think it just looks awesome overall. So let's talk a little bit about the vehicle and some of the details. Now, as I mentioned, 1978 was the last year this body style that began in 1971, ran through the 1978 model year, and the Eldorado would be revised for 1979. That second body style would last until 1985. Of course, the first front-wheel drive Eldorado was introduced in 1967, and that would carry on through 1970. And the 71 to 78 Eldorado was the biggest Eldorado that Cadillac ever made. This car was pushing about 5,000 pounds, and it rode atop 126-inch wheelbase and was about 221 inches in overall length. So just an enormous monster of a vehicle. Part of that length was due to the big bumpers, which, if you're a fan of this channel, you know were introduced beginning in 1973 in the front and in 1974 in the front and rear to meet 5-mile-an-hour impact standards. But part of it was just that this car was wide. And the reason for that was when the Eldorado was launched in 1971, General Motors program planners decided that it was going to share a significant amount of components with the full-size General Motors B bodies, including the windshield, the A-pillars, the door glass, the door inners. So there was a lot more commonality between this vehicle and the full-size cars than there was on the previous generation. So not only was the car bigger, but it was more profitable for General Motors because they could get better economies of scale on this particular platform. Now, a few exterior details and pieces of trivia that I'm sure viewers of this channel will want to know. First is that this is a Biarritz. You can tell by that spear that goes down the hood there and all the way around the back. And of course, it says Biarritz on the C-pillar. But the first year for the Biarritz trim on this model year, or this body style, was 1976. And it continued on through 1978. And then the Biarritz continued into the next generation and was a super successful trim of the Cadillac. The next generation, they had a stainless steel portion of the rooftop, a stainless steel cap that accentuated it a bit more. But you can tell that this is a 1978 Cadillac in a few ways. The first is because on the hood it has the Eldorado name spelled out in block lettering. That began in 1977. Before that, there was a little Cadillac script that was on the driver's side of that prow of the hood there. And the fenders, the bumper caps there on the front fenders, are painted black with the Cadillac logo. That began in 1977, would continue to 1978. In the 1976 model, those were just all stainless and not painted. And then finally up front in 1978, you had this egg crate grille texture. In 1977, it was thin vertical bars. So if you want to distinguish between the years of vehicles during this time frame, often look at the grille textures or the tail lamp treatments. Those would tend to change on an annual basis, particularly for the expensive cars where they wanted to do something a little bit new each year. Now out back, you can see that the taillights are integrated into the bumper there and into the overall fin. It's got vertical taillights. That was a change. The 1976 Cadillac had a primarily horizontal lamp underneath the deck lid. There were parking lights in those similar areas at the end of the vehicle, but it was not a full taillight that illuminated when you stepped on the brakes. I don't believe there's a way to differentiate between the 77 and the 78 Eldorados at the rear of the car. I believe it's the same treatment on both vehicles. Both also have the side marker light that spells out Eldorado, which I think is a nice touch. Now, amazingly, the trunk in this looks huge, but it's really not all that cavernous. I think it's about 15, 16 cubic feet, which isn't that bad by modern standards, but back in the time really wasn't that great. And I will tell you, compared to my 72 Sedan DeVille, for instance, the 72 Sedan DeVille had a trunk that was way, way bigger than my Eldorado that I had. And of course, if you're a Curtis Mayfield fan, you'll notice that this car has the diamond in the back, sunroof top, digging the scene with the gangster lean. And I think that was patterned off of this car. You can see the diamond shape to the backlight that was typical of the Eldorado Biarritz. You also see in this photo the coach lamp on the C-pillar. A nice touch that would come on with the headlights and the parking lights at night. Now, I mentioned that this car has a sunroof, and you'll see on the sunroof-equipped cars, if you open the driver's side door, this sticker that says this vehicle was altered by American Sunroof Corporation and as altered conforms to all applicable Federal Motor Vehicle safety standards. This is a factory option. So when you check the sunroof box in your Eldorado, the car would get sent to American Sunroof where it would be converted into what you see here. And American Sunroof was owned by Heinz Prechter, and this was the time frame where they were really becoming a popular supplier to the auto companies, not just General Motors, but also Ford, and they were putting a lot of sunroofs in vehicles, something that, well, really wasn't even an option before that, but just in case you see one of these stickers on a car, it doesn't mean that it was aftermarket. This was the factory procedure for converting your car to make sure that it had a sunroof. It was sent to American Sunroof Corporation. American Sunroof was also responsible in 1978. The final Eldorados, there was a special edition. There was a two-tone like peach and chocolate brown. And American Sunroof was responsible for those vehicles, ensuring that they were painted in the two-tone paint scheme as well, even if they weren't equipped with the sunroof. Now, before we turn to the interior, let's talk a little bit about some of the running gear underneath here, because I think this has some interesting features, and I'll tell you a few tidbits of trivia that I'm sure you'll like to know. First is notice the tread on the tires. These are GM original Uniroyal spec tires. GM actually specified the tread and engineered the tread, and then Uniroyal produced the tire. So these tires are original to the car. This is a 1,400-mile car, and it's actually available for sale on Bring a Trailer if you're interested. As of the time of me recording this video, I think the bid is at $25,000 or something like that. But in any case, if you see that tire tread, that is a GM spec Uniroyal tire, and only General Motors had it. It was an exclusive. Next, you can see that this car has a little bit of a spindly stabilizer bar up front there, and you have some frame supports, the catalytic converter. You can see the two exhaust pipes there going into the converter into a single exhaust. These cars have both a muffler and a resonator. An interesting piece of trivia is you may not know that these cars have torsion bar front suspension. You can see the two longitudinal bars there, very long bars. Those were effectively done because this is a front-wheel drive vehicle, and it was going to be hard to package the springs around the half shaft. So just use torsion bars, works just fine. It's an uncoiled spring, and the car handles quite well. The nice thing about torsion bars, too, is if the car starts to sag over time, well, you can easily adjust them and just kind of crank them up a little bit in terms of their tension, and the front end will rise. So an easier service procedure than we really can't do that with coil springs. You have to drop the coil springs and put new coils in. And for the really obscure trivia lover, this is the only classic General Motors vehicle that I know that has one particular feature that is unique to the underbody of the car. Can you guess what that is? If you said two drain plugs, then you got it right. This car has two drain plugs. There's one in the normal location there on the oil pan, and then there's another basically in front of the half shaft. So I think that what happened was the oil pan was pretty big, and then they had to have the half shafts running out to either wheel, and then that created the potential for a pocket where the oil could reside. And so having changed the oil in these cars a number of times, a little bit of oil comes out of that second drain plug. Not all that much, but they do have two drain plugs. Now let's turn to the inside of this vehicle, and this is really my favorite part because you see the white on red here, the red carpet, red dashboard, red wheel, red belts, complementing the white loose cushion look of the seats. These huge overstuffed seats with big buttons in the front and the rear. Interestingly, I wouldn't say they're all that comfortable. The firmness of the foam in those loose cushions is relatively high. I think it should have been softer. And perhaps some of that is just age, although I've sat in these vehicles that have been in climate-controlled garages with very low miles. But I think even when new, they weren't necessarily as comfortable as they look. That is to say that they're not uncomfortable, but you'd expect to kind of sink into them, and that's not entirely true in all these cases. Now, you can also tell this is a post-1976 Eldorado because you just have a 2-spoke wheel as opposed to a 3-spoke wheel. And you have the dash design that began in 1974 that was basically held over through 1978 at the end of the run. Beautiful pedal trim on these Eldorados, big accelerator pedal hinged at the bottom, a single-piece floor mat, a flat floor, unique to these full-size front-wheel drive cars of the time, the Eldorado and the Toronado. The Riviera would not become front-wheel drive until 1979. So overall, a very luxurious place to sit and one that was very enjoyable to, well, partake on a long drive in your seat. And here's the view from the driver's seat with the 2-spoke wheel. This car is quite loaded, as most Eldorados would be during this time frame. It does have cruise control, automatic climate control, automatic headlamp dimmer, as well as automatic headlamp turn on or twilight sentinel. The delay wipers with that awful joystick control that I absolutely hate, where the horizontal axis is the delay between min and max. And then if all of a sudden you hit a rainstorm after being on the delay feature, you have to crash through the off position before going up to low, medium, or high, the 3-speed wiper setting. And if you do it at an inopportune time, the wipers will enter the park position before they restart again. I absolutely loathe that control. And it feels cheap when you're operating it too. But I've ranted about that before. This car does also have tilt telescoping wheel. You can see the unlock for the telescoping function of the wheel that's just above that, well, center section of the steering wheel. So quite well equipped. And these cars often were sold that way. Of course, it was a luxury car and it was the late 70s. So if you got one of these, you often got quite a few options. And this car has an option that you don't see on new vehicles anymore. That's a factory CB radio. Check that out. It's got the Cadillac logo. That is stock. You could order that. This is a pretty awesome option that, well, back in the days before radar detectors, a CB radio was effectively a way of knowing that there was a cop ahead because somebody would let you know on one of the 40 channels. I've had the factory CBs in a number of my Cadillacs. I have to say that I've really enjoyed them. You can also see better here in this picture the flat floor. I should have mentioned the one-piece floor mat that came in a number of these full-size front-wheel drive cars of the era. And, you know, it looks good, but I really don't like the one-piece floor mats because they're hard to get out of the car, to shake out, and to clean. You also see on the right there in the passenger kickwell a litter container. That is a litter container that was removable. I don't know what you're going to put in there or why you'd want to just keep litter in your car as opposed to just throw it out when you're done driving, but that's what that is. That is a litter container. And now let's turn under hood. In 1978, this would be the penultimate year for Cadillac's 425 cubic inch V8 that was introduced in 1977. It was effectively a downsized version of the Cadillac 500 cubic inch V8, whose last year in production was 1976. So as I said, the 425 was produced from 1977 to 1979. After that, it would become a 368 cubic inch engine in 1980. These 425s aren't bad. They're about 180 horsepower, which for a 5,000-pound car isn't great, but I believe they're 315 pound-feet of torque. So a decent amount of torque, enough, that if you're just driving regularly, it feels quite nice. And you could get an optional fuel-injected 425 cubic inch V8 that I believe made 195 horsepower as opposed to the 180. And it had a little bit more torque, closer to 350 pound-feet of torque as well. Now, the 500 cubic incher in 1976 was only 190 horsepower, so not that much in terms of horsepower differences, but it did have more torque. It had around 350 pound-feet in carbureted form and 400 pound-feet in fuel-injected form. So it did have a bit more grunt to it than the 425, but the 425 is a good engine. I will point out that you notice this car has the orange sticker, a little sticker on the air cleaner. That is stock. So if you see that on your Cadillac, that is something that came from the factory that way, as well as the sticker on the valve cover that has kind of like a serial number. That is stock as well. Now, other strange bit of trivia, you'll notice the dual master brake cylinder there, but these Eldorados came not just with the regular power brake booster, but with hydro boost, which was a power brake assist that was powered off of the power steering pump, something that diesels used of the era, and actually long after these cars. Hydro boost was a pretty popular way of getting boost on vehicles with not enough vacuum or no vacuum like diesels to give you assist to the brakes. I think that it was employed on these Eldorados because they had four-wheel disc brakes. Yes, that's right, four-wheel disc brakes. And I just don't know if there wasn't enough vacuum to have the right power assist for four-wheel disc brakes. That would be what I would guess, as drums are self-energizing, so you don't need as much power assist if you had a front disc rear drum setup versus a four-wheel disc setup. You need more power assist in the latter case. And that's my guess, is that the standard vacuum boost just couldn't deliver enough power assist to have the right level of pedal feel. After all, you wouldn't want an owner really just stomping on the brake pedal or having to expend a lot of effort to basically apply the brakes in the car in something that was a luxury automobile. So a little bit of trivia, these do have the Hydro Boost assist, an early application of that. And for another piece of obscure Cadillac trivia, notice here on the driver's side fender, the pump for the rear air shocks. This is an electric pump. Cadillac had transitioned by this point to the electric pump, whereas in previous years they had employed a vacuum pump that sat in a pocket in the passenger side fender well. So I'm sure that everybody wanted to know that little piece of trivia. This was a more reliable setup. That vacuum one you could hear ticking away when you had the car idling, and it was kind of annoying. Just the car would make that noise, kind of a tick, 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 whenever it was running. You'll also notice here that there is a horn visible in the picture. This car does have the optional trumpet horn setup that had 4 horns, and when you sounded the horn, well, it really sounded like a train coming by. Hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the last of the Broughams, this 1978 Eldorado Biarritz. Thanks again for watching. Any other cars that you want me to discuss that you think are awesome Brougham vehicles, put a comment in the comment section.